We're following breaking news here at noon. The House has once again voted to direct President Donald Trump to end the war with Iran. 4 Republicans joined Democrats to approve a war powers resolution with a final vote 214 to 208. The Senate is expected to vote to advance a similar but separate measure later today. Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us here on CBS News Detroit. I'm Rochelle Graham. The House vote comes as injured service members are being flown out of the Middle East to a military hospital in Germany. That's according to a U.S. official and a source familiar with the matter. Natalie Brand is in Washington with the latest developments.
After a 12th consecutive night of U.S. strikes against Iran, CBS News confirms the military has deployed more aerial refuelers to places like Israel. Flight trackers have also shown B-1 bombers leaving bases in the U.K.
Really what they confirm is that the Pentagon is giving the president more options. They don't in and of themselves confirm that there's going to be escalation.
As President Trump made new threats this week to hit Iranian infrastructure, Iran's foreign minister fired back on social media, warning their defense doctrine is clear: an eye for an eye.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. Adams is here. There's something you should know. Both chambers of Congress passed a war powers resolution demanding Trump halt military action against Iran, a rare bipartisan act not seen since 1973, when Congress pushed back against Nixon during Vietnam. The legislative branch has reasserted its constitutional authority over war-making, a 5-alarm fire that most media is treating as routine. Now, while all of this constitutional drama was unfolding on Capitol Hill, something else was happening that added an entirely different weight to the situation. 4 American service members came home from the Iran conflict, but they did not come home the way any family hopes their loved ones will return. They came home in flag-draped caskets. Their remains carried off military transport planes with the kind of somber, heartbreaking ceremony that reminds everyone watching exactly what the true cost of war actually is.
4 U.S. Army soldiers killed in the Middle East during the war with Iran were returned to the U.S. last week in a dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, as President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth observed. Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton was killed during an Iranian drone detonation at Erbil Air Base in Iraq. First Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan, Private Isabella Gonzalez, and Army Sergeant Angel Rampersad were all killed in an attack at an airbase in Jordan. Army Sergeant Rampersad's mother spoke at a vigil in Queens, New York.
She fought for this country and she died for this country, and I am a mother that is highly proud of her. And I know she was really focused on what she was doing. She loved it.
President Trump was there for the dignified transfer, the formal military ritual where fallen heroes are received with full honors as grieving families look on. That image, those 4 caskets draped in the American flag, hit the country hard. It hit the country in a way that no poll number and no congressional resolution ever could. Because suddenly, this was not about geopolitics or war powers or constitutional separation of powers anymore. This was about real people. American sons and daughters who went to fight a war that many Americans are increasingly questioning and did not make it back alive. And now their families are standing on a tarmac somewhere, saying goodbye to the people they raised, the people they loved, the people they expected to see come home. And the brutal, uncomfortable truth that hangs over all of it is that most of the country is standing right there with those families, asking the exact same painful question. Was any of this worth it? Was this war worth the price that these 4 families just paid? Was it worth the price that so many other families might end up paying in the months ahead? The answer that Americans have given to that question is about as clear and as damning as any poll result you will ever see.
And we start this noon remembering that young U.S. soldier from Queens killed during an Iranian airstrike in Jordan. Sergeant Angel Rampersad was one of 3 soldiers who died in Friday's attack. And today we're learning more about her funeral services. Jennifer Bisram joins us live now from Ozone Park. Jennifer?
Hi, Jess. Throughout the last day or two, we've heard about Sergeant Rampersad's heroism and her bravery and selflessness from military officials. Today, at a news conference that wrapped up here a short time ago with community leaders and her family, we heard about her as a daughter, as a niece, as a student, and as the daughter of Ozone Park. Take a look at video that we have here for you. Standing in front of an American flag at half-staff near the white picket house fence where Sergeant Angel Rampersad stayed with her mother when she she wasn't on active duty in the U.S. Army, Carol Acevedo stood beside family and community leaders in tears.
A Washington Post and ABC News poll asked Americans whether the Iran war was worth fighting, and the number that came back was staggering. 68% said no. Not a slim majority, not a close call, not a number that leaves any room for ambiguity. 68%. That is almost 7 out of every 10 Americans telling you, in no uncertain terms, that this war should not have happened the way it did. When you lose 2/3 of the country on a military conflict, you are not looking at a minor political headache. You are looking at a political earthquake, and the tremors from that earthquake are only going to get stronger as this story continues to unfold.
Well, now to the war with Iran, and a new poll from the Associated Press National Opinion Research Center shows that most Americans say the war in Iran is not worth fighting.
That poll surveyed more than 1,000 adults from July 23rd through the 27th. Researchers found 64% of all adults do not think the war in Iran is worthwhile. Among those surveyed, 87% of Democrats and 68% of independents disapproved of the war effort. That changed, though, among Republicans. 61% of people who identify with the GOP surveyed that the war is worth fighting.
Yes, you can see the discrepancies there, depending on party affiliation. Joining us now to talk about the survey results is Melissa Michelson, professor of political science at Menlo College. So this is quite the shift in public opinion. What do you believe is driving the shift when it comes to the Iran war?
Well, most Americans don't support America being involved in war. The longer wars go on, the more public approval tends to drop off, and the more casualties pile up, the more people tend to disapprove. And so both of those things are happening.
So today, we are going to break this down from every angle. We are going to explain what is actually happening here, why Congress just did something it has not done in 50 years, why the American public has turned so decisively against this war, and why the long-running tension between Trump and his top military leaders is now exploding back into the national conversation at the absolute worst possible moment. This is big. This is serious, and this is exactly the kind of story that mainstream media either buries under a mountain of other coverage or spins so aggressively that you cannot even tell what actually happened anymore. So we are going to slow it down and walk through it step by step. We are going to make sure you get the full picture, not the sanitized version, not the talking head spin, but the real story. The story that starts with something that happened 50 years ago in the aftermath of the worst military conflict in American history. Let me set the scene for you, because before you can understand why Congress just acted the way it did, you need to understand what the War Powers Act actually is and why it exists in the first place. The War Powers Act was passed in 1973 as a direct response to the disaster that was Vietnam. Congress, having watched presidents gradually expand their war-making authority without meaningful legislative oversight, decided that enough was enough. They passed a law that basically said, hey, presidents cannot just go start wars without us anymore. We have a constitutional role to play here, and we are going to start playing it. The law requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing American forces to combat. Then Congress has 60 days to either authorize the conflict or not. If Congress says no, the president has 30 more days to pull the troops out. That is the law. It is clear. It is specific. It was designed to prevent exactly the kind of unchecked executive war-making that had happened in Vietnam. But here is the thing about that law. For decades, presidents of both parties have basically ignored it or found creative ways to work around it. They argue that the commander-in-chief has inherent authority to act in the nation's defense. They cite national security concerns. They push the boundaries of what the law allows, and Congress usually lets it slide because challenging a president on war powers is politically risky. Nobody wants to look like they are not supporting the troops. Nobody wants to be accused of undermining the commander-in-chief during a time of crisis. So for decades, the War Powers Act sat there on the books, a legal tool that Congress was always too afraid to actually use. But this time, something cracked. This time, Congress did not let it slide. This time, enough members decided that the stakes were too high and the consequences too serious to just look the other way. And here is the detail that makes this even more significant. The fact that Republicans crossed the aisle to join Democrats in passing this resolution tells you that even Trump's own party has serious questions about how this war has been handled. This was not a partisan attack. This was not Democrats being obstructionist for the sake of obstruction. This was members of the president's own party looking at the situation and saying, wait a minute, we did not authorize this. The American people did not vote for this. And the Constitution says we are supposed to have a say in whether our country goes to war. So, they voted with Democrats. They voted against the president of their own party. And together, they passed a resolution that essentially tells the commander-in-chief to pump the brakes. That is a story. That is a big deal. And we are going to get into every single layer of it. Now, here's what most people are missing about this story. And I mean really missing because on the surface, it looks like a congressional procedural fight. Politicians arguing over legal authority and constitutional boundaries. And if that is how you see it, it is easy to tune out. You might think to yourself, yeah, Congress does stuff all the time, big deal, who cares? But look deeper and you will see that this is actually 3 separate crises colliding at the same exact moment. You have got a war that nearly 7 out of 10 Americans think was a mistake. You have got Congress doing something it has not done in over half a century. And you have got 4 American families who just lost their loved ones. Those 3 things together are not a political dispute. That is a reckoning. That is a moment where the country is being forced to confront hard questions about leadership, about authority, about sacrifice, and about whether the people in power are making wise decisions with the lives of American service members. And Trump is right in the middle of it all. Let me tell you what makes this situation even more complicated and even more explosive. This is all hitting on top of a relationship between Trump and the military leadership class that has been strained for years. This is not a new tension. This is not something that just emerged because of the Iran conflict. This is a pattern that goes back to the very beginning of Trump's political career, and it has only gotten more pronounced over time. So let us go through all of it. Let us start with the congressional resolution itself because, are you kidding me? This is genuinely historic, and it is not getting the attention it deserves. Both the House and the Senate passed a concurrent war powers resolution, directing Trump to stop military action against Iran. The Senate vote was the one that put it over the line and made it both chambers. And here is the thing that makes it really sting for Trump. Republican senators broke with him to make it happen. This is not a small detail. This is a massive political development. Republican senators, members of his own party, looked at this Iran conflict and said, wait a minute, we did not authorize this. The American people did not vote for this. And the Constitution says we are supposed to have a say. So they voted with Democrats and together they passed a resolution that essentially tells the President of the United States to stop. This is wild. This is the kind of thing that you usually only read about in history books. And it is happening right now in real time. The fact that it took until this moment for this to happen again tells you just how rare this kind of institutional courage actually is in Washington. Members of Congress do not usually go against a president from their own party on something as serious as war powers. It is politically dangerous. It invites primary challenges. It angers the base. But enough Republicans decided that the stakes were high enough and the situation serious enough that they were willing to take that risk. Now Trump has pushed back. Of course he has. He has argued that his authority as commander-in-chief gives him the power to take action to protect American interests and national security. And look, that argument is not new. Presidents have made it for decades. Every president who has ever stretched the boundaries of war powers has made exactly that same argument. But here is the problem. The argument lands a lot harder when the war is going well, when the country is united, when there are victories to point to. When families are not watching their sons and daughters come home in caskets, that argument sounds more plausible. Right now, the public mood is not one of victory and unity. The public mood is doubt and grief. And when 68% of Americans tell pollsters that a war was not worth it, the commander-in-chief argument starts sounding a lot less convincing. It starts sounding like, yeah, right, you have this authority, we get it. But that does not mean the decision was right. Authority and wisdom are 2 completely different things. And right now, the American people are questioning both. And then there is the military angle, because here is another layer that most people are not connecting to this story. Trump has a long history of conflict with top military leaders. This goes back years. There were detailed reports that Trump called some of his top generals losers. He called them a bunch of dopes and babies. Those were the words attributed to him. And the generals and senior military officials who served in his administration have at various points come out publicly to criticize his judgment and his leadership. Some of them wrote books, some gave interviews, Some spoke out in ways that were strikingly candid for people who had served at the highest levels of the military establishment. The tension between Trump and the professional military class has been a defining undercurrent of both his first term and his second. It is a thread that runs through his entire presidency, visible to anyone who has been paying attention. And when you combine that history with a war that is now producing casualties and a Congress that is openly challenging his war powers authority, you have got a perfect storm of political and institutional backlash. Every old wound gets reopened. Every old criticism gets fresh oxygen. And suddenly, the question is not just about Iran. The question is about a pattern of friction between this president and the people responsible for actually executing his military decisions. That pattern is now front and center in the national conversation in a way that it has not been before, and it is making an already difficult situation even more challenging for the White House. I want to be clear here, because this is important, and too many people get this wrong. Criticizing how a war is conducted is not the same thing as not supporting the troops. Full stop. Say it louder for the people in the back. The service members who came home in those flag-draped caskets served with honor and courage. They answered the call. Their sacrifice deserves to be taken seriously. But taking it seriously means asking hard questions about how and why we got here. It means holding leaders accountable. It means making sure that the decision to send Americans into harm's way was made wisely and legally and with the full backing of the Constitution. That is not attacking the troops. That is honoring them. And right now, both Congress and the American public are asking those hard questions in a very loud way. Anyone who tries to shut those questions down by wrapping themselves in a flag is doing a disservice to the very people they claim to support. Let us talk about what 68% actually means politically, because that poll number is staggering and I do not think it has fully sunk in yet for a lot of people. 68% of Americans told Washington Post and ABC pollsters that the Iran war was not worth fighting. In modern American polling, that is a landslide level of disapproval for a military conflict. For context, the Vietnam War at its most unpopular never had numbers quite that bad this early. The Iraq War eventually got there, but it took years of grinding conflict and tens of thousands of casualties before public opinion turned that sharply against it. The fact that we are already at 68% is a signal that should terrify anyone inside the White House who is paying attention. It is a signal that Americans are paying attention. It is a signal that the initial justifications for the conflict either did not land or did not hold up under scrutiny. And it is a signal that the political cost of this war is going to keep climbing the longer it continues without clear answers. Here is the other thing about that poll number that nobody seems to be talking about. 68% is not a Democratic number. It is not a Republican number. It is an American number. For you to get to 68% disapproval, you need Republicans in that total. You need independents. You need people who voted for Trump and still support him on other issues. But look at this Iran situation and feel genuinely uneasy. That is the coalition pushing back. And that is exactly why Republican senators felt politically safe enough to cross the aisle and vote for that war powers resolution. Because they know their constituents. They know that back home in their states, regular Americans are looking at those flag-draped caskets and asking questions. Hard questions. And those senators made a calculation that the political risk of standing with Trump on this one outweighed the political risk of breaking with him. That calculation being made by members of his own party is itself a massive warning sign. Let us zoom out for a second and talk about what this means constitutionally, because this is not just a social media fight between Congress and the White House. This is a genuine separation of power showdown, and those have consequences that last decades. The framers of the Constitution were very clear about who has the power to declare war. That power belongs to Congress, not the president. Congress. The president is the commander-in-chief once war is authorized, but the decision to go to war, that is supposed to require the people's representatives. The War Powers Act was Congress's attempt to codify that principle after Vietnam proved how badly things could go wrong, when presidents run wars without proper authorization and accountability. Now you have both chambers invoking that act simultaneously. The question every constitutional law scholar in the country is asking right now is what happens when the White House decides to ignore it? Because if Trump pushes forward and Congress's resolution is treated as optional, what does that do to the balance of power going forward? What precedent does that set for the next president and the one after that? This is not abstract. This is about the fundamental rules of how American democracy is supposed to work. And this is wild, because those rules are being tested in real time right now. And this is where the story gets deeply human, not just political, not just constitutional, but human. 4 service members came home from Iran in caskets. 4 families got that knock on the door that nobody ever wants to receive. 4 sets of parents, siblings, spouses, children had their world shattered. The dignified transfer ceremony, where the caskets are brought off the plane with full military honors while families and officials watch in silence, is one of the most gut-wrenching things that happens in American public life. President Trump was there. And whatever you think of him, whatever side you are on, that moment cuts through the politics. Because behind every casket is a real person who believed in something enough to put on a uniform and go. And when 7 out of 10 Americans say the war was not worth it, part of what they are saying is that those losses feel even heavier. Because if the cause was not right, if the legal authority was not clear, if Congress did not authorize it, then what exactly did these Americans die for? That question hangs in the air right now, and nobody in Washington has a clean answer. So, let us break it all down, because we have covered a lot, and I want to make sure the key points land clearly. This is not just one story. This is multiple stories hitting at the same time, and together they add up to something much bigger than any one of them alone. Congress just made history, and most people do not fully realize it. When both the House and the Senate passed a concurrent war powers resolution telling Trump to stop military action against Iran, they did something that has not happened since 1973. That is over 50 years. The War Powers Act was passed after Vietnam specifically to prevent presidents from waging war without congressional approval. For decades, presidents found ways around it or Congress looked the other way. But this time, Congress did not look away. Passing the resolution does not automatically end the conflict. Trump can still push back. He can argue commander-in-chief authority. He has options. But what Congress has done is put itself on record publicly, officially in a way that cannot be erased or ignored. They have said the legal foundation for this war is not solid. That matters for the courts if this ends up in litigation. It matters for history, and it matters for the political calculus going forward. Because now any Republican who goes out and defends the war has to explain why members of their own party disagreed loudly enough to go on the record in a historic bipartisan vote. That is a hard thing to explain away, and it is going to hang over this White House for a long time. The public is not with Trump on this one, and the numbers are getting worse, not better. Are you kidding me? 68%. I keep coming back to that number because it is so significant. 2/3 of Americans. Not a slight majority. Not a coin flip. 2/3 said this war was not worth it. That is a number that should be setting off alarm bells in every corner of the West Wing, because wars have a way of defining presidencies. A war that 7 out of 10 Americans think was a mistake is the kind of thing that gets written into the history books in a very unflattering way. There are hard lessons from Vietnam. There are hard lessons from Iraq. The lesson every time is that when you lose the public on a military conflict, the political damage compounds over time. Every new casualty becomes a referendum. Every new news cycle is another chance for that disapproval to harden into something permanent. Right now, the trend line is going in the wrong direction for Trump. The caskets coming home do not help. The congressional resolution does not help. The more these things pile up, the harder it becomes to turn the narrative around. Public opinion on wars can shift, but it usually shifts in one direction once it starts moving. Right now, it is moving away from Trump. The Trump-military relationship has always been tense, and that backstory matters more right now than it ever has. When reports surfaced years ago that Trump called his top generals a bunch of dopes and babies, it told you something real and important about how he views military leadership. He values strength and toughness and winning. When he feels like his generals are not delivering those things, he has made his frustration very known very loudly. But here's the thing that people underestimate about the professional military class. These are not yes men. These are not politicians who shift with the wind. Military leaders do not just fight the war in front of them. They plan for contingencies. They advise on strategy. They push back when they think a course of action is flawed or dangerous. They are supposed to give the president their honest assessment, even when it is not what the president wants to hear. That is literally their job. If the relationship between Trump and uniformed military leadership has been fractured for years, that becomes a serious problem when you are in the middle of a conflict that is producing casualties and generating massive public doubt. You need your commanders and your president pulling in the same direction. You need trust flowing both ways. The history here suggests that has not always been the case. Now that history is catching up, what happens next is the question everyone needs to be watching, because this story is nowhere near over. The War Powers Resolution has been passed. Congress is on the record. The poll numbers are brutal. The caskets have come home. The political pressure on Trump from both inside and outside his party is real and growing by the day. So what does he do from here? Does he double down and push forward, arguing that national security justifies a conflict and that Congress is overstepping into executive authority? Does he look for an off-ramp? Some kind of diplomatic pathway that lets him declare a version of victory and pull back without losing face? Or does this escalate further, both militarily and politically, turning into a full constitutional standoff between the executive and legislative branches that ends up in the courts? Those are the three paths. Right now, it is genuinely not clear which one we are headed down. The White House has not tipped its hand. The situation is fluid. Every day that passes without a clear resolution is another day for the political damage to compound. Look, here is the bottom line, and I want to say this clearly. The people who support Trump will say Congress is playing politics with national security. They will say Democrats, and even some Republicans, are undermining the commander-in-chief during a time of active conflict. That is a real argument. Presidents need authority to act quickly in dangerous situations. The world does not always wait for congressional debates. But the counter-argument is equally real and equally powerful. The Constitution matters. War powers exist for a reason. The reason is that sending Americans to die is the most serious thing a government can do. It should not be done without the full weight of democratic authorization behind it. These are not simple questions, but they are the questions that 50 years of history prepared us to ask. Congress is asking them. The American public is asking them. The families of 4 fallen service members are asking them. Sooner or later, this White House is going to have to give real answers. Here is what I want you to sit with after this. We have a war that most Americans oppose. We have Congress doing something it has not done since the Vietnam era. We have American service members coming home in caskets. We have a president whose relationship with his own military leadership has been rocky and complicated for years. All of that at the same time. Somehow this is not the lead story on every channel every night. Somehow the full weight of what is happening here does not always land the way it should. Well, we are not doing that here because this matters. The families of those 4 service members deserve for this to matter. The 68% of Americans who said this was not worth it deserve for this to matter. The constitutional principles that Congress just stood up to defend deserve for this to matter. Stay locked in because this story is not over.